In the heart of a bustling city where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and life never seemed to slow down, there lived a man named Dr. Marcus Kane. He was no ordinary individual. His name carried weight, respect, and admiration across all corners of society. A brilliant neurosurgeon by profession, Marcus had saved countless lives with his steady hands and sharp mind. But what truly set him apart wasn't just his medical expertise. It was his unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. Marcus grew up in a modest neighborhood, the son of hardworking parents who instilled in him the values of kindness, perseverance, and integrity. From a young age, he dreamed of becoming someone who could make a difference. After years of relentless study and sacrifice, Marcus achieved his dream. He graduated at the top of his class from one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and quickly rose through the ranks in the medical field. Yet despite his success, Marcus never forgot where he came from. He often said, "Success isn't measured by how much you earn, but by how many lives you touch." Beyond his work as a surgeon, Marcus was deeply involved in charitable efforts. He founded a nonprofit organization that provided free healthcare to underserved communities, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, and even organized workshops to educate people about mental health. His generosity knew no bounds, and his actions inspired others to follow suit. People admired him not only for his accomplishments, but also for his humility and compassion. Despite his glowing reputation, Marcus's journey hadn't been without challenges. As a black man navigating predominantly white spaces, he faced prejudice and discrimination more times than he cared to count. There were moments when doors closed in his face simply because of the color of his skin. Some patients questioned his abilities, assuming he couldn't possibly be as skilled as his white counterparts. Colleagues sometimes dismissed his ideas or took credit for his contributions. Yet through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. He believed that proving doubters wrong was far more satisfying than letting bitterness consume him. On this particular evening, Marcus was returning home after attending a charity gala hosted by his organization. The event had been a resounding success, raising millions of dollars to support various causes close to his heart. Smiling to himself, Marcus reflected on the evening's highlights, the heartfelt speeches, the standing ovations, and the promise of brighter futures for those in need. It filled him with a sense of fulfillment that few things in life could match. As he drove along the quiet streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, Marcus felt a rare moment of peace. The city, usually alive with noise and activity, seemed unusually calm tonight. He turned up the volume on the radio, humming along to the soothing melody playing in the background. Everything was going smoothly, until suddenly, red and blue, lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Confused, Marcus glanced at his speedometer. He hadn't been speeding, nor had he broken any traffic rules. Still, he pulled over carefully, ensuring he followed proper protocol. Rolling down his window, he prepared to speak with the officer approaching his car. What he didn't know, however, was that this simple act would change everything. Two officers stepped out of their patrol car, their boots crunching against the pavement. One of them, Officer Grayson, walked toward Marcus with an air of hostility that immediately put him on edge. Grayson's partner, Officer Daniels, lingered nearby, watching silently. Marcus greeted them politely, asking if there was a problem. Instead of responding directly, Grayson leaned into the car, his eyes scanning the interior with suspicion. "License and registration," Grayson barked, his tone unnecessarily harsh. "Of course," Marcus replied calmly, retrieving the requested documents from the glove compartment. Handing them over, he asked again, "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Grayson ignored the question, flipping through the papers with exaggerated slowness. Then, without warning, his demeanor shifted. "This car doesn't belong to you," he declared abruptly, his voice dripping with accusation. Marcus blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry," he said, his confusion evident. "This is my car. You can see the registration matches my license." But Grayson wasn't listening. He sneered, gesturing to the sleek, expensive sedan. "A guy like you driving something like this doesn't add up." The implication behind his words was clear. though unspoken. A black man shouldn't own such luxury. Marcus felt a familiar pang of frustration, but chose to remain composed. "Officer, I assure you this vehicle is mine. If there's any doubt, feel free to verify the VIN number." Instead of checking, Grayson exchanged a glance with Daniels, who smirked knowingly. Together they began peppering Marcus with intrusive questions about his income, his job, and how he afforded such an extravagant lifestyle. Each query dripped with thinly veiled contempt, painting a picture of guilt based solely on stereotypes. When Marcus answered truthfully, explaining his career achievements and philanthropic endeavors, the officers scoffed. "Yeah, right," Daniels muttered under his breath. "Sounds like a load of bull." The tension escalated rapidly. Despite Marcus's attempts to de-escalate the situation, Grayson grew increasingly aggressive. Without probable cause, he ordered Marcus out of the car, citing vague suspicions of criminal activity. When Marcus hesitated, reminding them of his rights, Grayson snapped. With unnecessary force, he yanked open the door, dragging Marcus out and slamming him against the hood. The cool metal pressed against Marcus's chest as Grayson cuffed his wrists tightly. Every instinct screamed at Marcus to resist, to demand justice, but he knew better. Fighting back would only give them more ammunition to justify their behavior. So he stood there, humiliated and enraged as the officers mocked his appearance and belongings. They ridiculed his tailored suit, calling it too fancy for someone like him, and laughed at the Rolex on his wrist, suggesting it must have been stolen. By the time Marcus was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car, his mind raced with thoughts of disbelief and anger. How could this happen? Why were these men treating him like a criminal when he'd done nothing wrong? Yet even in that dark moment, a small part of him refused to give up hope. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was bigger than that. This injustice wasn't unique to him. It was a reflection of a deeper, systemic issue plaguing society. And so, as the patrol car sped away, leaving his abandoned luxury sedan behind, Marcus made a silent vow. No matter what happened next, he wouldn't let this moment define him. Instead, he would use it to shine a light on the darkness, to expose the truth, and to fight for a future where no one else would have to endure what he was experiencing now. Little did he know, this decision would set off a chain reaction that would shake the very foundations of power in the city and beyond. The ride in the back of the patrol car was suffocating. Marcus sat stiffly on the hard, cracked seat, his hands cuffed behind his back. The air inside the vehicle smelled faintly of stale coffee and sweat, a reminder of countless other people who had likely been hauled away in the same manner. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. How could this have gone so wrong so quickly? One moment he was driving home peacefully after a fulfilling evening, and the next he was being treated like a common criminal. Officer Grayson drove with reckless abandon, weaving through traffic without regard for speed limits or stop signs. Officer Daniels, sitting in the passenger seat, occasionally glanced back at Marcus with a smirk that sent chills down his spine. Neither officer spoke to him directly, but their body language said it all: disdain, suspicion, and a sense of superiority that made Marcus's stomach churn. As they sped toward the precinct, Marcus replayed the events of the traffic stop in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about a stolen car or any real crime. It was something deeper, uglier, a prejudice rooted in ignorance and fear. He thought about how Grayson had questioned his ownership of the luxury sedan, mocking his success as if it were impossible for someone like him to achieve such things. That someone like him part lingered in Marcus's mind. It wasn't just an insult. It was a reflection of a mindset that saw black excellence not as an accomplishment, but as a threat. When the patrol car finally screeched to a halt outside the police station, Marcus braced himself for what came next. The officers yanked him, out roughly, ignoring his protests when the cuffs dug painfully into his wrists. They marched him inside, pushing him forward whenever he hesitated. The building buzzed with activity, phones ringing, radios crackling, and voices overlapping in hurried conversations. None of the officers seemed particularly interested in why Marcus was there. To them, He was just another faceless suspect, another statistic in their endless cycle of arrests. They led him to a small, dingy holding cell deep within the station. The walls were painted a dull gray, and the floor smelled faintly of bleach, mixed with something far less pleasant. A single flickering fluorescent light cast harsh shadows across the room. Inside, 2 men already occupied the space. One slumped against the wall, snoring loudly, while the other paced nervously, muttering under his breath. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, taking in the grim scene before him. This wasn't where he belonged. Not here. Not like this. Grayson shoved him inside and slammed the barred door shut behind him. "Welcome to your new home," he sneered, his lips curling into a cruel grin. "Maybe you'll learn some humility in here." Marcus didn't respond. He knew better than to give these men the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. Instead, he moved to the far corner of the cell, keeping his distance from the other inmates. As he leaned against the cold metal bars, he closed his eyes and took slow, deliberate breaths. He needed to stay calm, focused. Panicking wouldn't help him now. Time passed excruciatingly slowly. Minutes felt like hours, and the oppressive silence of the cell was broken only by the occasional groan from the sleeping man or the nervous pacing of the other. Marcus's thoughts drifted to his family. What would they think when they found out what had happened? His teenage daughter, Sophia, idolized him. She often told her friends how proud she was to have a father who saved lives and helped people. Would she see him differently now, knowing he'd been arrested? And his wife, Elena, how would she react? She had always been his rock, his unwavering support system. But even she might struggle to comprehend the absurdity of this situation. Just as despair began to creep in, Marcus heard a commotion outside the cell. Voices rose sharply, followed by hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway. Curious, he pressed closer to the bars, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Moments later, a young officer appeared, looking flustered. He whispered something to Grayson and Daniels, who exchanged uneasy glances before disappearing. Down the corridor, it wasn't long before Marcus learned the reason for the sudden tension. Unbeknownst to him, a bystander had recorded the entire traffic stop on their phone. The video captured every detail: the aggressive tone of the officers, the baseless accusations, and the unnecessary force used during his arrest. Within hours, the footage went viral, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Hashtags like "Young Justice for Marcus" and "End Police Brutality" trended worldwide, drawing attention to the blatant racial profiling and misconduct displayed in the clip. Back in the cell, Marcus remained unaware of the storm brewing outside. He continued to sit quietly, strategizing his next move. If he could just get access to a phone call, he could reach out to Evelyn Carter, his trusted attorney and longtime friend. Evelyn was sharp, resourceful, and fiercely loyal. She'd know exactly what to do to get him out of this mess. But for now, he was stuck waiting, relying on patience and hope. Meanwhile, the public reaction grew louder and more intense. People took to the streets, organizing protests outside the police station and demanding answers. News outlets picked up the story, airing segments that highlighted Marcus's accomplishments and questioned the legitimacy of his arrest. Prominent figures, from activists and politicians to celebrities and influencers, spoke out in his defense, amplifying the call for accountability. The pressure mounted rapidly, forcing the police department to issue a vague statement promising an internal investigation. Inside the station, tensions ran high. Officers whispered anxiously among themselves, aware that the spotlight was now firmly fixed on their actions. Some defended Grayson and Daniels, claiming they were simply doing their jobs. Others privately admitted that the arrest looked bad, though few dared to say so aloud. The chief of police called an emergency meeting, urging everyone to remain professional while scrambling to contain the growing scandal. As night fell, the noise outside the station intensified. Protesters chanted slogans, held up signs, and lit candles in solidarity with Marcus. Their voices carried through the thick walls, reaching even the darkest corners of the holding cells. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight. Thousands of strangers had rallied to his side, united by a shared desire for justice. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Marcus refused to let bitterness consume him. He understood that this moment wasn't just about him. It was symbolic of a much larger issue. Every unjust arrest, every act of discrimination, and every instance of abuse of power contributed to a system that desperately needed reform. And, if his experience could serve as a catalyst for change, then perhaps it wouldn't be in vain. By the time morning arrived, the situation had reached a tipping point. The police department, overwhelmed by the backlash, decided to release Marcus pending further investigation. When the cell door finally opened, Marcus stepped out with quiet dignity, his head held high despite the sleepless night and the weight of everything he'd endured. Reporters swarmed him as he exited the station, shouting questions and shoving microphones in his face. But Marcus ignored them, focusing instead on finding Evelyn, who was waiting nearby with a look of fierce determination in her eyes. "You okay?" she asked softly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Marcus nodded, though his expression betrayed the turmoil beneath the surface. "I'm fine," he said, his voice steady. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." Evelyn smiled, grimly, understanding exactly what he meant. Together they walked toward her car, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Marcus knew the road to justice wouldn't be easy, but he also knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't stop, fighting until the truth came to light, and until the system that allowed this kind of injustice to happen was dismantled once and for all. The release of Marcus Kane from custody marked the beginning of a whirlwind that would sweep through the city and beyond. As he stepped out of the police station, flanked by his attorney Evelyn Carter, the world seemed to hold its breath. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every step Marcus took. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. "Dr. Kane, what happened? Do you feel targeted because of your race? Will you sue the police department?" The barrage was relentless, but Marcus remained composed. He offered no immediate answers, choosing instead to let his actions speak louder than words. Evelyn guided him toward her car, shielding him from the crowd as best she could. Once inside, Marcus exhaled deeply, leaning back against the seat. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to process everything that had transpired: the humiliation of the arrest, the coldness of the cell, and now this, public scrutiny on an unimaginable scale. Yet despite the chaos, Marcus felt something, unexpected clarity. This wasn't just about him anymore. His story had become a symbol, a rallying cry for those who had long suffered under the weight of systemic injustice. Back at Evelyn's office, a sleek, modern space filled with books, legal documents, and awards lining the walls, the two began strategizing. They knew they couldn't waste time. Public attention was fickle, and if they didn't act quickly, the momentum could fade. Evelyn laid out a plan: gather evidence, build a case, and expose not only the officers involved but also the larger system that enabled such behavior. Marcus nodded in agreement, adding one crucial stipulation. "We don't just aim to win," he said firmly. "We aim to change." Meanwhile, outside the confines of Evelyn's office, the city buzzed with activity. Social media platforms were ablaze with discussions about Marcus's arrest. People shared memes, videos, and heartfelt posts expressing solidarity. Hashtags like "Cry Justice for Marcus" and "End Racial Profiling" dominated Twitter trends, while Instagram stories featured black squares accompanied by captions urging reform. Even TikTok creators joined in, using their massive followings to spread awareness. Local news outlets dedicated hours of coverage to the unfolding drama. Talk shows invited guests to debate the issue, ranging from civil rights activists to former law enforcement officials. One particularly heated segment featured a retired detective defending Grayson and Daniels, claiming they were simply following protocol. His arguments fell flat when confronted with footage of the arrest, which clearly showed excessive force and baseless accusations. Viewers flooded the network with complaints, forcing the host to issue an apology for giving airtime to such flawed reasoning. The pressure on the police department intensified daily. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, holding signs that read "Black Lives Matter" and No justice, no peace. Their chants echoed through the streets, disrupting the usual hum of city life. Business owners nearby voiced mixed reactions. Some supported the movement wholeheartedly, while others grumbled about lost revenue due to road closures. But regardless of personal opinions, it was impossible to ignore the sheer size and passion of the demonstrations. What started as a local outcry soon gained national attention, drawing supporters from neighboring cities and states. Politicians, always quick to respond to public sentiment, scrambled to take sides. Some issued statements condemning the arrest, calling for investigations and reforms. Others hedged their bets, offering vague platitudes about fairness and equality without committing to concrete action. A few tried to downplay the incident altogether, suggesting it was an isolated event blown out of proportion by the media. These attempts at deflection only fueled more anger, further galvanizing the public. Amidst the noise, Marcus remained focused. He gave his first official interview to a trusted journalist known for championing social justice causes. Sitting in a quiet studio, dressed in a crisp suit that exuded professionalism, Marcus spoke candidly about his experience. He recounted the details of the traffic stop, describing how Officer Grayson had questioned his ownership of the luxury sedan and mocked his appearance. He explained how the situation escalated unnecessarily, emphasizing that his cooperation hadn't mattered to the officers. But Marcus didn't stop there. He used the platform to highlight broader issues, pointing out that his story was far from unique. "This happens every day," he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "To countless people who don't have the resources or visibility, I do. My arrest isn't just about me, it's about exposing a system that dehumanizes and discriminates. And until we address that, nothing will truly change." The interview resonated deeply with viewers. Calls poured into City Hall demanding accountability. Petitions circulated online, gathering hundreds of thousands of signatures in mere days. Activist groups organized teach-ins, town halls, and workshops to educate the public about racial profiling and police misconduct. Schools incorporated discussions about the incident into their curriculums, encouraging students to think critically about privilege, bias, and systemic inequality. Behind the scenes, Evelyn worked tirelessly to bolster their case. She filed formal complaints against Officers Grayson and Daniels, requesting disciplinary action and an independent investigation. She also subpoenaed records from the police department, seeking information about past misconduct allegations involving the two officers. Her instincts proved correct. Both men had histories of similar incidents, though none had resulted in significant consequences. This revelation added fuel to the fire, reinforcing suspicions of a pattern of abuse shielded by institutional protection. Marcus, meanwhile, leaned on his network of allies to amplify the message. Friends in high places, business leaders, academics, and entertainers used their influence to keep the spotlight on his case. Celebrities posted heartfelt messages of support, while philanthropists donated funds to organizations fighting for criminal justice reform. Even rival surgeons, typically competitive and guarded, reached out to offer assistance. It was clear that Marcus's reputation as a compassionate and brilliant individual transcended professional boundaries. Yet not everyone rallied behind him. Critics emerged, questioning whether Marcus's prominence skewed perceptions of the incident. Some argued that if he hadn't been wealthy and well-connected, the public response might have been different. While these comments stung, Marcus understood their validity. Rather than dismissing them, he acknowledged the privilege he held and pledged to use it responsibly. "My goal isn't to elevate myself above others," he said during another interview. "It's to lift everyone up. If my story can shine a light on the struggles faced by those without a voice, then it's worth every challenge I've endured." As days turned into weeks, the narrative shifted slightly. The focus expanded beyond Marcus's arrest to include broader conversations about policing practices, racial bias, and community safety. Town hall meetings drew packed crowds, with citizens sharing personal stories of encounters with law enforcement. Many recounted experiences eerily similar to Marcus's, highlighting the pervasive nature of the problem. These testimonies humanized the statistics making it impossible to dismiss the calls for reform as mere rhetoric. In response to mounting pressure, the police chief announced plans to review departmental policies. He promised increased training on implicit bias, greater transparency in disciplinary proceedings, and efforts to improve relations with marginalized communities. Skeptics viewed these promises with caution, noting that similar pledges had been made and broken in the past. Still, Marcus saw an opportunity. If leveraged correctly, this moment could lead to meaningful change. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his study, he reflected on the journey so far. The arrest had been humiliating, infuriating, and exhausting. But it had also ignited something powerful, a collective awakening. People were paying attention, speaking out, and demanding better. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt hopeful. Hopeful not because he believed the fight would be easy, but because he knew it was necessary. And if there was one thing Marcus Kane excelled at, it was rising to meet challenges head-on. With renewed determination, he picked up his phone and dialed Evelyn. "Let's get to work," he said simply. Together, they prepared for the battles ahead, knowing full well that the road to justice would be long and fraught with obstacles. But neither doubted that the cause was worth it. After all, history had shown time and again that progress often came at a price, and Marcus was ready to pay it, not just for himself but for everyone who deserved a fairer, more equitable future. The days following Marcus Kane's arrest were a whirlwind of strategy, action, and mounting tension. With public outrage at an all-time high, the pressure on the police department, and everyone connected to it, was immense. But Marcus wasn't content to sit back and let events unfold on their own. He knew this moment was too important to waste. It was time to turn his personal ordeal into a catalyst for systemic change. And so, alongside Evelyn Carter, he began orchestrating what would become one of the most ambitious campaigns for justice the city had ever seen. Evelyn wasted no time diving into the legal battle. She filed multiple lawsuits against the officers involved in Marcus's arrest, as well as the police department itself. These weren't just about seeking compensation or accountability. They were designed to force transparency. Evelyn demanded access to internal records, disciplinary files, and training materials, hoping to uncover patterns of misconduct that extended far beyond Grayson and Daniels. Her request sparked immediate resistance from the department, which claimed confidentiality laws prevented them from releasing certain documents. But Evelyn was relentless. "If they're hiding something," she told Marcus during one of their late-night meetings, then we'll make sure the world knows. While Evelyn handled the legal side, Marcus focused on leveraging his influence. His reputation as a respected neurosurgeon and philanthropist gave him unique access to powerful circles, and he used that advantage wisely. He reached out to politicians, business leaders, and media figures, urging them to amplify the message of reform. Many responded enthusiastically, pledging their support. Others were hesitant, worried about alienating donors or constituents who might view calls for police reform as overly radical. But Marcus didn't back down. In private conversations, he reminded these individuals of their responsibility to lead by example. "Silence isn't neutral," he often said. "It's complicity." One of Marcus's boldest moves came when he partnered with a prominent investigative journalist named Lisa Hartwell. Lisa had built her career exposing corruption and abuse of power, and she jumped at the chance to collaborate with Marcus. Together, they launched a series of exposés that peeled back layers of secrecy surrounding the police department. Using leaked documents, whistleblower testimonies, and data obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, Lisa published article after article revealing shocking truths, falsified reports, ignored complaints, and a culture of retaliation against officers who dared to speak out. Each new revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Citizens read with growing horror as they learned how deeply rooted the problems were. One story detailed how Officer Grayson had been the subject of numerous misconduct allegations over the years, yet faced no real consequences. Another exposed a pattern of racial profiling within traffic stops, showing that black drivers were disproportionately targeted compared to white drivers under similar circumstances. The evidence painted a damning picture of a system designed not to protect, but to oppress. To ensure maximum impact, Marcus and Lisa coordinated closely with grassroots organizations already fighting for justice. Activists organized rallies, vigils, and marches, drawing thousands of participants each time. Volunteers handed out flyers, shared information online, and encouraged people to contact their representatives. Social media played a crucial role, allowing supporters to spread awareness rapidly. Hashtags like #BWAR expose the truth and systemic change trended daily, keeping the conversation alive and ensuring that Marcus's case remained front-page news. But Marcus didn't stop there. Knowing that words alone wouldn't be enough, he decided to take things a step further. For years, he'd quietly collected evidence of misconduct, not just within the police department but across various institutions of power. Long before his arrest, Marcus had installed discreet surveillance systems in key locations around the city, including areas frequented by law enforcement officials. At the time, he hadn't known exactly what he was looking for. He simply wanted to document interactions between citizens and authorities, believing that knowledge could someday be used to hold wrongdoers accountable. Now those recordings became invaluable tools. Working with a team of trusted allies, Marcus reviewed hours of footage, searching for anything that could bolster their case. What they found was staggering. Videos captured instances of excessive force during routine arrests, discriminatory behavior toward minority groups, and even off-duty officers engaging in illegal activities. One particularly explosive clip showed a group of officers joking about planting evidence to secure convictions. The implications were enormous, and Marcus knew they couldn't keep this information hidden. At first, Evelyn cautioned against releasing the footage too quickly. "We need to be strategic," she warned. "If we drop everything at once, they'll try to discredit us or bury it under bureaucracy." Marcus agreed, understanding the importance of timing. Instead, they decided to release the evidence piece by piece, carefully selecting moments that would resonate most with the public. Each revelation added another layer of credibility to their claims, making it harder for critics to dismiss the accusations as isolated incidents. The first batch of videos hit the internet like a bombshell. Within hours, millions of people watched clips of officers behaving recklessly and unethically. News outlets scrambled to verify the authenticity of the footage, but the sheer volume of corroborating details made denial nearly impossible. Protesters held up tablets and phones displaying the videos during demonstrations, chanting slogans like "Show the truth" and "No more lies." The visual proof resonated deeply, leaving little room for doubt about the extent of the problem. As the campaign gained momentum, Marcus faced increasing pushback. Critics accused him of grandstanding, suggesting that his wealth and fame gave him an unfair advantage in pursuing justice. Some even questioned whether his motives were purely altruistic, insinuating that he sought revenge rather than reform. Marcus brushed off the attacks, knowing they stemmed from fear and defensiveness. "Let them talk," he told Evelyn. "The facts speak for themselves." Behind closed doors, however, the backlash took its toll. Anonymous threats poured in, targeting Marcus, his family, and anyone associated with his cause. His teenage daughter, Sophia, received hateful messages on social media, prompting Marcus to hire private security for his loved ones. Despite the danger, he refused to back down. "They can threaten me all they want," he said firmly, "but I won't let fear silence me." Meanwhile, the police department found itself under siege. Internal investigations were launched, though many suspected they were nothing more than window dressing meant to placate the public. Officers grew visibly uneasy, unsure whom to trust. Whispers of dissent spread through the ranks, with some expressing frustration over being scapegoated while others defended their colleagues' actions. Morale plummeted, and tensions ran high. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus delivered a powerful speech at a massive rally organized by activists. Standing before a sea of faces illuminated by candlelight, he spoke passionately about the need for accountability and reform. "This isn't just about me," he declared, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "It's about every person, who has ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, their background, or their beliefs. We cannot allow injustice to thrive in the shadows. We must shine a light, and we must demand better. The crowd erupted in applause, cheering loudly as Marcus raised his fist in solidarity. Cameras captured the moment, broadcasting it live to audiences worldwide. For many, it marked a turning point, a signal that the fight for justice wasn't just about punishing bad actors, but about dismantling the structures that enabled abuse in the first place. By the end of the month, the campaign had achieved significant milestones. Several officers implicated in wrongdoing were suspended pending investigation, and calls for federal intervention grew louder. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing oversight of law enforcement agencies, while advocacy groups pushed for sweeping reforms. Though challenges remained, progress felt tangible, and Marcus knew they were closer than ever to achieving lasting change. Still, he understood that the battle was far from over. Every victory came with setbacks, every step forward accompanied by resistance. But Marcus remained undeterred. He believed wholeheartedly in the power of persistence, in the idea that small actions, when multiplied by millions, could transform the world. And as he stood surrounded by supporters united in purpose and determination, he allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. This is only the beginning, he thought to himself, a faint smile playing on his lips. The momentum behind Marcus Kane's campaign for justice continued to grow, fueled by a combination of public outrage, damning evidence, and strategic moves orchestrated by Marcus, Evelyn Carter, and their growing network of allies. What had started as a personal fight against racial profiling and police misconduct was rapidly transforming into a nationwide reckoning with systemic corruption. And just when it seemed the pressure couldn't intensify further, a bombshell revelation sent shockwaves through the city and beyond. It began during a routine meeting between Marcus and Lisa Hartwell, the investigative journalist who had become an integral part of the effort. Together, they were reviewing newly uncovered footage from Marcus's surveillance systems, searching for anything that might strengthen their case. The hours of video had already yielded explosive content, but one particular clip stood out, a grainy recording taken inside what appeared to be a dimly lit basement. At first glance, it seemed innocuous, showing a group of men seated around a table engaged in conversation. But as Lisa zoomed in and adjusted the audio settings, the implications became chillingly clear. The men were high-ranking officers from the police department, along with several civilian figures whose faces were obscured but whose voices hinted at prominence. They weren't discussing routine operations or community safety. Instead, they spoke openly about illegal activities, ranging from bribery and extortion to outright violence. One officer casually mentioned cleaning up loose ends, while another joked about intimidating whistleblowers into silence. Most disturbing of all was a brief exchange about Marcus himself. Someone referred to him as a problem that needed to be dealt with permanently, prompting nods of agreement from the others. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he listened to the recording. This wasn't just misconduct, it was conspiracy. A shadowy cabal operating within the police force, orchestrating abuses of power over decades. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. These weren't isolated incidents of bad behavior. This was a calculated system designed to protect its own interests at any cost, even if it meant destroying innocent lives. Lisa immediately recognized the significance of the footage. "This changes everything," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "If we release this now, there's no way they can deny it. We'll have exposed the heart of the corruption." But Marcus hesitated. Releasing such sensitive material carried risks, not just for him but for everyone involved. If the group in the video discovered the source of the leak, retaliation could escalate dramatically. Still, he knew they couldn't afford to stay silent. After consulting with Evelyn, they agreed on a carefully planned rollout strategy. Rather than dropping the entire recording at once, they would release excerpts strategically, ensuring maximum impact while minimizing potential fallout. The first snippet aired during Lisa's primetime special, watched by millions across the country. Viewers sat glued to their screens as the chilling voices filled their living rooms, accompanied by subtitles clarifying each speaker's role. Social media exploded almost instantly, with hashtags like "Corrupt Cops Exposed" trending globally. Calls flooded City Hall demanding immediate action. Protesters gathered outside the police station chanting slogans like "No more cover-ups" and "Bring them to justice." Within hours, cracks began forming within the police department. Officers who had previously defended Grayson and Daniel suddenly distanced themselves, claiming ignorance of the alleged conspiracy. Some even came forward as whistleblowers, offering testimony in exchange for immunity. Among them was Officer Harris, a mid-level detective known for his cautious demeanor. In a dramatic press conference held alongside federal investigators, Harris revealed shocking details about the inner workings of the cabal, including names, dates, and locations of secret meetings. Harris's cooperation marked a turning point in the investigation. Federal agents descended on the city, raiding offices, seizing documents, and interrogating key figures. Dozens of arrests followed, including top brass who had long operated with impunity. Chief among them was Deputy Commissioner Bradley, a man once celebrated as a reformer but now implicated as one of the cabal's ringleaders. His arrest sent shockwaves through the department, leaving lower-ranking officers scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. As the list of indictments grew, so did public demand for accountability. Citizens packed town halls, urging officials to implement sweeping reforms. Activists called for independent oversight boards, body cameras for all officers, and mandatory bias training. Schools incorporated lessons about systemic racism and civic responsibility into their curriculums, ensuring future generations understood the importance of vigilance. Even corporations joined the movement, pledging funds to organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform. For Marcus, the revelations brought both vindication and unease. On one hand, he felt validated knowing that his suspicions had been correct. The system he'd fought so hard to expose was finally crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. On the other hand, the scope of the conspiracy left him shaken. How many lives had been ruined by these men? How many injustices had gone unnoticed because victims lacked the resources or platform to speak out? Evelyn noticed the toll it was taking on him. Late one evening, after another grueling day of interviews and legal filings, she found Marcus sitting alone in his study, staring blankly at a wall covered in notes, photos, and timelines. "You've done more than anyone could ask," she said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "But you can't carry the weight of the world on your own." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know," he admitted. "But sometimes it feels like no matter how much progress we make, the problems are endless, like cutting off one head of a hydra only to see two more grow back." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's why we keep fighting. Not because we think we'll solve everything overnight, but because every step forward matters. Every life touched, every policy changed. It adds up." Her words resonated deeply, reminding Marcus why he'd embarked on this journey in the first place. He hadn't set out to dismantle an entire system single-handedly. He simply wanted to shine a light on the truth. And though the road ahead remained fraught with challenges, he took solace in knowing that change, real, lasting change, was possible. In the weeks that followed, Marcus redoubled his efforts, focusing not just on exposing wrongdoing, but also on rebuilding trust within the community. He partnered with local leaders to establish programs aimed at fostering dialogue between citizens and law enforcement. Workshops taught de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution. Youth mentorship initiatives connected young people with positive role models, steering them away from cycles of violence and mistrust. At the same time, Marcus used his platform to amplify marginalized voices, ensuring that those most affected by systemic injustice had a seat at the table. He invited activists, scholars, and survivors of police brutality to share their stories at conferences and panels, creating spaces where diverse perspectives could be heard and valued. These efforts earned him praise from supporters and critics alike, solidifying his reputation as a unifying figure in the fight for equality. Yet, despite the progress, threats continued to loom. Anonymous messages targeted Marcus and his family, warning him to back off before things escalated further. One night, someone threw a brick through the window of his home, narrowly missing his daughter Sophia. Security teams scrambled to tighten protections, installing reinforced doors and motion-activated cameras. Marcus did his best to shield his loved ones from fear, but the constant danger weighed heavily on him. Still, he refused to let intimidation deter him. Instead, he channeled his anger and frustration into action, doubling down on his commitment to justice. During a televised interview, he addressed the threats directly, vowing not to be silenced. "They can try to scare me," he said, his voice firm, yet calm. "But I won't stop until we've rooted out every last trace of corruption. Because if we don't stand up now, when will we?" His defiance inspired countless others to join the cause, swelling the ranks of protesters and advocates. Together, they formed a formidable coalition, united by a shared vision of a fairer, more equitable society. As rallies grew larger and louder, politicians began taking notice, introducing legislation aimed at addressing the issues raised by Marcus's campaign. Some measures focused on policing practices, while others tackled broader societal inequalities. Though debates raged over specifics, one thing was clear: the status quo was no longer acceptable. By the end of the month, the landscape had shifted dramatically. The once unassailable police department now faced unprecedented scrutiny, with calls for transparency and accountability echoing from every corner. Federal investigations continued, uncovering layer after layer of misconduct. Meanwhile, grassroots movements gained traction, pushing for reforms that extended far beyond law enforcement. Education, housing, healthcare, all were seen as interconnected pieces of the larger puzzle of inequality. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast, driven by a sense of purpose that transcended personal gain. He understood that true justice wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about creating a world where everyone, regardless of background, could live with dignity and